At least once a year, it seems McFarlane wants to make this one particular item the ultimate collectible to get out of the McFarlane toy store. But does it really matter when so many people are actually a little bit unacquainted with this specific Batman? And yes, it's a little bit of a contention that I am going to be presenting because, frankly, I am not familiar almost whatsoever with The Night People, which is Detective Comics number 587, illustrated by Norm Breyfogle. See, again, I'm not too terribly familiar with this arc of the comics. I'm pretty certain that I've seen this illustration, this interpretation of Batman before in passing, but I never really stopped to see exactly who were the pencilers, who were the illustrators, hell, who even the writers were. And like I said, I never really read this arc of the comics, but I've seen some people really take me to task on it and really recommend this arc of Night People, and they recommend it as like one of the better highlights of Batman comic arcs. So I'm definitely going to take that to heart because you guys made yourselves known in the comments when I tackled about this reveal. And frankly, that wasn't really too long ago because in one of the fastest turnarounds, we got the figure revealed, announced for pre-order, and finally in hand in practically record time. Which is not necessarily one of the more surprising things for a McFarlane Toy Store exclusive, let alone one that is taking yet another existing buck, repainting it, but then adding some really unconventional and interesting and surprising and sometimes a little conflicting additions and differences to, like I said, a figure that we practically have gotten, I want to say about 4 or 5 times at this point. Yes, you can blatantly tell that this is in fact another entry into the Nightfall ranking of bucks utilized for what many consider to be the definitive Batman. Again, it looks like sooner rather than later, we're going to have another Nightfall ranking video. And so that's one of the things that I kind of want to tackle head on first is the fact that it is that Nightfall bucks. So you're going to notice an awful lot of sculpting within the body proportions, within the actual way that everything is just tooled and pieced together. It is pretty much straightforward, the Nightfall bucks. So in terms of the way that his build is designed, his physique, the way that almost certain individual creases are practically identical on the buck itself, it's going to be 1-to-1. So there's really not much that I can comment on in terms of physique, in terms of presentation, and the same thing really goes for articulation. In fact, I'm just going to cut to the chase in terms of a quick time lapse because I feel like I've already dealt with this. Where are we now? Like about 5 or 6 times, and I feel like there's even some variants out there. Like I said, some of you made it clear that Catman is sporting the Nightfall buck, and through fault of my own, quite frankly, I completely forgot about the Dick Grayson Batman that was recently released and taken from the Batman Reborn storyline. So my apologies, but I did manage to omit that. It just kind of went over my head completely. But I will be lying if I didn't say that when it comes to color scheming and actually being clever with the Nightfall buck, the Night People Batman here is doing a little bit of a number on me because this color scheme, despite dividing certain people's feelings that are huge fans of the Night People storyline and that specific Detective Comics issue, frankly, I feel like this color scheme that we did get in McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse form is kind of going a little hard. I don't know what it is, but there's something about this specific color scheme they utilized for a very dark jet black sort of smoky, I want to categorize it as gray, but it's also kind of leaning towards just being a straightforward, very light black, a matte finish light black, jet black, kind of like that alternate GameCube color. So you had the indigo purple, but then you had the black, but it wasn't a full-on saturated, no colors admitted here black. It was more like I said, like a smoky, lightish color black to it, like a charcoal. And so kind of complementing that a little bit is this very dark navy blue for the gauntlets, the boots, the crotch diaper piece, and then of course the cowl along with pretty much the cape, or I should say here capes. We'll get to that momentarily, but to complement that, you have those two colors working in tandem, and then contrasting those colors, but really popping in a very satisfactory way, is the yellow for the utility belt, which is sculpted pretty much, like I said, 1-to-1 identical to that of the Nightfall. They really didn't change all that much there. But then you have the bat symbol, which is, like I said, weirdly working on me. I actually really like how much thicker the bat symbol is there across the wingspan in the middle. And then, like I said, the specific hue of yellow that's kind of mustardy. So it's not like a straightforward, just static yellow. It's more like a little more saturated, but not quite gold. It's somewhere kind of in the middle. And frankly, like I said, it's just making the entire attire, the entire ensemble of his costume here actually popping and working in its favor. And frankly, I can't really say too much different about the head sculpt. I was kind of worried that I wasn't really going to vibe with it because I thought it was a little too lean looking, a little too straightforward, a little anemic, one would say. But now seeing it in hand and holding the head sculpt in my hand, frankly, like I said, complements the figure, the spikes there on the shoulders, and the overall physique. I would say that this is probably one of the better utilizations of the Nightfall Buck thus far. And again, it's kind of creating a little bit of a spell on me in terms of show presentation, in terms of catching my eye and making it seem like something that I would be proud to put up on the display and be kind of proud of it. Even if, like I mentioned before, the articulation is completely identical to the previous Nightfall releases, so nothing to really speak up on that except for maybe the way that the mechanisms work with the head, but I can't really tackle that just yet because it then comes with the territory of the remainder of the accessories that sets this whole thing apart. But before we get to that, let's cut to some of the more basic stuff that comes with this Nightfall Buck, which are going to be the standard accessories that you've seen time and time again. Of course, you got that standard Batarang that I feel like we're gonna have like Ziploc bags of in droves at this point. And then, of course, the fisted hands, because he comes with gripping hands by default, so on the side you're going to have those fisted hands. Matching the color scheme of that dark navy blue, but again, in terms of sculpting, in terms of gesturing, they're completely identical to ones that you've gotten in the other releases. But to kind of change things up in a very surprising manner, you do have two alternate extending hands, and these are thankfully gestating in a much different manner that I've never really seen before. Either that, or maybe they came with a previous buck of a different character that was utilizing this buck, and I just never really paid attention to the alternate hands that those came with. But this one in particular comes with these extending, really personality-driven hands that really speak to this version of the character and kind of makes sense to complement this character more. So I really like them. What I don't like, but I don't necessarily dislike either, I'm sort of indifferent, are these two other accessories that I'm pretty certain are very much driven by any kind of story context built within the Night People comic arc, because frankly, I just don't know why they're here. But again, that's just my fault. I never really read this specific version of the comics, this version of Batman, and what it is that he has going on in terms of foiling what appears to be Scarface, because he comes with this dummy head modeled after Scarface. That's the only other character that I can think of within Batman's Rogues Gallery that would be utilizing a puppet. But you can see here that it's simply just his disembodied head with a really strong emotion on his face. It's sculpted and painted pretty decently. It's got this rod kind of sticking here from the bottom, and there's nothing about it that's really there to kind of stand out. I kind of wish that maybe the mouth was a little articulated, or you can kind of twist and turn it on said rod, but it's just kind of like a static piece. And likewise, he also comes with a static expression with the eyes veering off to this side, so if you want him to look directly at Batman to make it look like he's coming alive, then he's got to be posed with the right hand. But if you want him to look off into the distance, then with the left hand. So that really just falls down to you. But otherwise, with me, like I said, it's just something that's kind of tossed in there, and I don't really think too much about it in terms of functionality. It's something that has a little bit more function to it, but still gets kind of lost on me in terms of story context, would have to be the breathalyzer piece. And the main reason for that is because even though it's painted and sculpted, like I said, pretty decently, nothing to really write home about in terms of intricate detail, but he does kind of look neat and ready for the winter flu season with it. But in order to really make it seem like it's flushing up against the face very adequately, it's kind of tough because it's sculpted with with the arc right here, with the thing that's kind of buckling and holding it all together here towards the back. It's simply just a rubberized piece. And when I try to slip it on, you have to do it from the underside of his head sculpt. And to do so, you have to remove the head and kind of slip it from underneath. And when you do that, it does kind of press down on the back of the loop. And I'm kind of scared that over time, that's going to create some kind of wear and tear, some kind of erosion on the rubberized part of this plastic that then is going to result in breaking and just kind of snapping it off into 2 pieces right here towards the back. So I'm a little nervous about that. But when you do kind of get it snug there in place, it does flush against the mouthpiece a little bit more comfortable than doing it in any other kind of method like I tried to do. I even tried to slip it from the top, and that's not going to be possible. It's sculpted in a very specific diameter that it's not going to cover all of his head and clear it out. So you're going to have to remove the head, slip it from underneath, pop it back onto the head joint, and Bob's your uncle. The curious thing, though, is going to be that you better get used to removing the head pretty frequently if you're going to take advantage of the biggest feature about the Night People Batman here, and probably the sole reason for why it became a McFarlane Toy Store exclusive and not released out to the public and wide retailers. And that's, of course, going to be the giant elephant in the room here, the static, pre-sculpted, waving, dynamic, and very stylized cape that he's got going on here. Modeled after actually the cover for Detective Comics 587, Night People. And frankly, in terms of replicating that art style and that cover specifically, I would say that they did a pretty bang-up job in terms of cutting and sculpting and making everything look very wavy and tattered and kind of blowing in the wind to that specific direction. You see right there that the way that it's coming off of his shoulders, where yeah, he's got the spikes right there, which are very indicative to this version of Batman, but then the way it just kind of ripples and tears here into the distance. And frankly, if I may be just a little lazy here, it does a bang-up job of serving as a form of stand to make sure that your Nightfall Buck is properly standing up, especially when you kind of give him a slight bend at the knees. And you'll notice right here that he's fully balanced out with the remainder of the cape here towards the bottom, especially around this area right here where it even kind of looks like a little bit of a bat symbol in and of itself. But in terms of detail, I kind of wish that maybe we would have added a few more creases, but that's just me nitpicking. I understand that that's just frankly me just trying to pull something out of my ass to say what it would have been like to kind of amplify a little bit of the quality. But in terms of what you do get here, and again, having it be a very showstopper sort of static piece, especially when you get, or at least manage through immense trial and error, posing him with this specific version of the cape is pretty badass, especially when you get him looking to his left, away from the cape to make it look like maybe he's facing the wind. It's actually a pretty sick looking pose that you can get him in with something like this. It's almost like you're getting half and half a statue, but still kind of attached to an action figure that technically has posing and accessories and detail that is of the caliber of McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse line, so you're not breaking the bank with like a resin statue or anything like that, or even a PVC one. But again, that's if you can get him in those poses, because this is where a little bit of this novelty sort of starts to wear off. It's once you get to positioning the arms where I do feel like maybe this little guy needed just a little bit of extra time in the oven. Because with this kit that he comes by default out of the box, posing the legs, maybe moving around a little bit of the torso, no problem. It's once you get to the top of the shoulders that, due to the way that they specifically sculpted the molded piece that's then attached to the rest of the cape, and it's all one giant block of plastic here, you then run into some trouble because, let me demonstrate here. Say I want to kind of extend the arms just a little bit to kind of make it look like me. Oh, look at that, look at that, look at that. Comes off the slot and the rectangular peg to then remove itself completely from the body. And frankly, you expect this sort of function to happen, especially since you want to be able to, again, take advantage of the secondary accessory and to the reason for why this is such a deluxe piece, which is going to be the ability to swap it for the cloth cape, or rather the fabric felt good cape, because it's technically, again, that nylon fabric sort of material, so it's not necessarily cloth, but it is a little bit more robust and thicker than your traditional nylon one that they've been including with some of the Nightfall Bucks, specifically some platinum releases like the Bullseye Batman, and the wiring on the outer rim is pretty sturdy. But say, for example, you want to be able to swap these two. As you can see, they're kind of utilizing the same sort of molding for the top part here with the spikes and the neck collar. So all you really have to do is, like we were doing with the breathalyzer, removing the head and simply just popping said head onto the fabric piece right here. And after doing that, you pretty much got Bat Ghost here. Or if you want to replicate the Adam West bat symbol or the bat logo that he's got going on with his show, where you have his head but then you have like the wings or like the Batman, I want to say the Super Friends kind of version. I remember there was this logo that had his head and then the wings, and then inside of it, it would spell out Batman, and that's it. He was a very disembodied head attached to the bat symbol. It was strange. But if you want to mimic that, technically you could do so right here by simply taking this little tab, folding it out, and this is pretty much how it comes right out of the box. You fold out the cape, and like I said, the wiring that they utilize here is pretty sturdy. However, right off the bat, you can tell that the way that the tattering and the very overly stylized way that they replicated that cover art for this plastic, or this, hard plastic static version, statuesque version of the cape, they kind of tried to do the same thing with the fabric material cape, only this time, of course, you're technically able to articulate it with the wiring on the outer side, and then, of course, the way that the stitching is there towards the top and towards the bottom. But you'll notice just how massive this thing really is. And even when attaching it to the body, because of how, for lack of a better term, loose that tab and that rectangular peg really is, it doesn't stay on for very long. Literally, either the plastic cape or the cloth cape here, the fabric cape, every time I move the arms or even the head, look at that, immediately comes off. They could have used, I don't want to necessarily say an adhesive because then that will render this whole functionality useless, but this needed some extra R&D time because the peg they utilized, the function, maybe the schematics, maybe they were a little off by a couple millimeters, I don't know, but this thing needed to hold on to it a little tighter. It needs some sort of resistance so that when we're moving these shoulders about, it doesn't just come off so easily because, god damn it, in terms of a very static pose, like say something like this, either of these capes look pretty badass, especially when you know how to properly pose it, how to properly bend the wires on the cloth one, or how to utilize gravity to your advantage to make sure that the plastic one, the hard one here, doesn't necessarily topple over the figure. He looks badass looking the opposite direction, swapping out the hands, making it look like he's holding the Scarface head or he's throwing a batarang, something like that. But every time I really want to do that, this thing just comes off easily. So this is definitely going to be a piece that has to stay static in a certain position. Otherwise, you're going to have a headache on your hands because a number of times I thought to myself, man, this was just inching and inching and inching closer to being a legitimate figure that is worthy of being a McFarlane Toy Store exclusive, worthy of selling out and being turned around so quickly, boasting the gold label, having all these accessories and all these little goodies kind of tossed in. And frankly, what I would argue, a little bit of a competitive price. For $50, what's included here is not necessarily bad. Trust me, in the time since, we've gotten some certain announcements recently that are most definitely not consumer friendly as far as pricing and what you really get for in the box, if you know exactly what I'm talking about. Here I'd argue that we got one that had the potential of fulfilling that value very effectively and giving me a reason for why this thing is definitely a little bit of a holy grail, McFarlane holy grail, with how fast it sold out, with how exclusive it was to the store. But you see right here exactly how I'm struggling to keep him up, not just with this really wide cloth cape or fabric cape, but also the plastic one. And when it comes to posing him, he's going to have to stay very, very static and keep his arms literally below shoulder length because trying to raise it or do anything with it is going to cause the top piece here, the collar piece that's attached to his head, to come off so easily that it just renders the rest of it so useless, especially if you're going to be posing him on the included gargoyle base you see right here. That is then tossed in and kind of swapped in for the static black bases that he typically comes with, which I still make the argument he should have came with because I really can't imagine it costing all that much McFarlane to just throw in the plastic discs. I mean, come on, it's just a piece of plastic. You could still toss it in there if you want to go with a static museum piece. But if you want to go with something dynamic, that's still going to be a little challenging to do so with something like this and still dealing with the cumbersome cape because, yes, I get it. It's trying to mimic that art style and points for trying to do something a little unique, especially when you're dealing with a buck that we've seen so many times before. But again, a little bit more research and development probably would have benefited this guy. And perhaps with enough patience, maybe you two will end up with something as best as this. Because in the limited amount of time that I have right now while filming this video, you'll notice that jump cut right there. That took me a good 5, 6-ish additional minutes to get this guy in this specific pose and finally have the head sit on the rectangular peg for long enough to at least get something going here that makes him look somewhat badass. But I would probably require an additional bit of time to at least swap out some of the hands, make sure that it looks like he's looking directly at the Scarface head, or make it look like he's throwing the batarang, or he's gestating with these rather unique hands that I do appreciate. But you see right here that whether it be with the cloth cape or the plastic cape, there was definitely a novel idea here to at least shed some light on what could be argued as one of the more obscure takes on Batman. One that has a bit of a die-hard following that definitely wants to have this version be known, especially when I read like some of the quotes and some of the log lines for this specific version of Batman in the comics and the Detective Comics, and it definitely piqued my interest. But I feel like McFarlane definitely wasted a little bit of the opportunity by not taking their time. Because now I'm looking at the turnaround time from, again, tease to announcement to pre-order to release and finally delivery, and I'm growing a little suspect that this thing was turned around so quickly outside of the phenomenon of it being a McFarlane Toy Store exclusive, of utilizing the Nightfall buck. There probably still required a little bit of extra time, especially when you take into account that this is not their first time dealing with this concept of swapping out capes. We had that year 2 pack that I think was a Target exclusive. I could be wrong about that, but I do remember seeing it one time at a Target back in 2021. And now it looks like he tried to tackle that concept once more, but maybe things are just growing a little bit too busy at McFarlane Toys headquarters with the licenses that are jumbling, that this guy unfortunately slipped through the cracks, which is a shame because I was kind of touting this as maybe that hot release that could be a bit of a hidden gem, a little bit of a holy grail, and I feel like maybe that status wasn't fully achieved. But I'm still kind of smitten with the base, the very unique base that he comes with, the gestating hands that I never really seen before on a Nightfall buck. And speaking of the reutilization of the Nightfall buck, I would argue that this is probably one of the more showcasier ones, specifically with the color scheme, that definitely makes it a bit of a static piece. You know, a lot of collectors like to throw around this word piece. Oh, it's a nice piece, it's a nice piece, to the point where they kind of dilute the meaning of that word. But I would argue that this is probably a figure that took a shot of becoming a genuine piece, an art piece, a figure collectible piece. It just missed the mark by just that much and managed to land in a 7 out of 10 category. It's still a worthwhile addition to your collection of Nightfall bucks, especially if you want to build upon the ranking, if you want to have like a dedicated shelf to all those Nightfall bucks being utilized time and time again with different suits and variances in mind, especially since, again, a lot of people, justifiably so, call it their definitive Nightfall buck Batman. But here, again, I just think about the wasted potential and what this could have done for the property of Night People. If any of you by some chance have any ideas of what would have made this kind of worthy of that title of Holy Grail, let me know down in the comment section below. And while you guys are down there, hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this review, thumbs down if you did not. And as always, I appreciate you guys for watching all the way to the very end, and take care. In the meantime though, stay humble.